In 1925, the German astronomer Johannes Kepler made a discovery that would completely change the understanding of Christ's birth. By calculating the planetary positions backward for the year 7 BC, he identified something that hadn't happened in 800 years, a triple conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn in the constellation of Pisces. It wasn't a one-night event, it was a celestial dance that lasted months, especially visible from a specific region of the world, Persia, the very place from which the MAGI set out. But here's the cognitive rupture that generations of theologians have ignored. How did Persian MAGI, fire worshippers, pagan astrologers, know how to interpret that celestial phenomenon as the sign of the birth of the King of the Jews? Matthew 2:2 records that they declared with absolute conviction, "We have seen his star in the east and have come to worship him." They didn't say, "We think maybe." They said, "We have seen and we have come." Total certainty. Meanwhile, just 8 kilometers from Bethlehem, the scribes and Pharisees, who possessed the scriptures, studied prophecies daily, and awaited the Messiah, saw absolutely nothing. Matthew 2:3 captures the absurdity with a devastating phrase, "When King Herod heard this, he was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him." When the Magi asked, "Where is the king who has been born?" the whole city went into panic. Not joy, confusion. What do you mean born? Where? When? No one knew. They had to consult the scribes, who after searching the scrolls confirmed Micah 5:2 points to Bethlehem. But none of them moved to check. Gentiles traveled 1,500 kilometers following celestial signs. Jews didn't walk 8 kilometers with the Bible in hand. The answer to this paradox lies 600 years earlier in Babylon. Daniel, a young Hebrew exile, was forced to study in the Royal Chaldean Academy of Magic, Astrology, and Occultism. Nebuchadnezzar didn't want to train scribes. He wanted counselors who could decipher mysteries, and Daniel not only outperformed all the Magi, he became their chief, Rab-Mag, and during 70 years of service in Babylon and later in Persia, he did something that changed history. He transmitted the Hebrew prophecies to the Persian wise men. He planted seeds of revelation in Gentile soil. He taught them to connect biblical chronology with astronomical observation. He left a map, and 600 years later, the heirs of that school, the Magi from the east, deciphered the code and found the king. Daniel 1:4 describes the profile Nebuchadnezzar required for his royal academy. Young men without defect, good-looking, instructed in all wisdom, knowledgeable in science, versed in knowledge. It wasn't a rabbinical school, it was the Esagila, the world center of astrology, advanced mathematics, and omen interpretation. 6th century BC, Babylon was the Silicon Valley of the occult. They had astronomical observatories that recorded planetary movements with impressive precision, and Nebuchadnezzar wanted the brightest young Hebrews trained in that tradition. Not to destroy their faith, to absorb their intellectual capacity. Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah underwent a 3-year program studying the language and literature of the Chaldeans, Daniel 1:4. It was institutionalized brainwashing. The strategy was clear: turn devout Hebrews into Chaldean sages, loyal to the king. But something unexpected happened. Daniel 1:17 records, "To these 4 young men God gave knowledge and intelligence in all kinds of literature and wisdom. But to Daniel he gave understanding of all kinds of visions and dreams." They mastered the academic content, but they didn't abandon the source. While other Magi tried to access the supernatural through rituals and formulas, Daniel had a direct line to the Creator. At the end of the 3 years, Nebuchadnezzar personally tested all the candidates. Daniel 1:19-20 reveals the result. No others were found like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. And in every matter of wisdom and understanding about which the king questioned them, He found them 10 times better than all the magicians and enchanters in his whole kingdom. 10 times. Not a small margin. Crushing superiority. The young Hebrews proved that secular knowledge, combined with divine revelation, produces excellence that occultism alone can never achieve. But here's the detail most overlook. They didn't reject Chaldean science. They mastered it. They understood astronomy, mathematics, calendar systems. And then they used that knowledge as a bridge to introduce Hebrew prophecies into Persian thought. Daniel wasn't just a brilliant student. He became a teacher. He rose to the position of Rab-Mag, chief of all the wise men, astrologers, and diviners of Babylon, Daniel 2:48. And later, when Persia conquered Babylon, he continued serving under Darius and Cyrus. He spent 70 years at the top of the empire's educational structure. He wasn't just a political advisor, he was the guardian of knowledge. He trained successors, he set curricula, and during those 7 decades, he introduced something revolutionary into the Chaldean Persian educational system: Hebrew prophecies. Not as a competing religion, as the science of the future. He showed that the God of Israel not only created the stars, he programmed historical events into them. He taught all this to the Persian Magi, and the Magi inherited a double legacy: Chaldean astronomical science combined with Hebrew prophetic chronology. Matthew 2:2 records that the Magi declared, "We have seen his star in the east." But modern astronomers have discovered something unsettling. It wasn't a star. Johannes Kepler calculated backward the planetary positions for 7 BC and identified a triple conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn in the constellation of Pisces. Jupiter and Saturn approached, separated, and met again 3 times in the same year, in May, October, and December. To observers in the east, it looked like a new star appearing, moving, disappearing, and reappearing. The star was a celestial clock programmed by God. Why did this matter to Persian Magi? Because in the Chaldean astrology Daniel studied and surpassed, each planet had prophetic meaning. Jupiter was called Tzedek in Hebrew, meaning justice, and considered the royal planet. Saturn was associated with the Jews for historical reasons tied to the Sabbath and cycles of 7. And Pisces was the constellation linked to Israel in ancient astronomical tablets. When Jupiter, king plus Saturn, Jews plus Pisces, Israel, aligned 3 times, the astronomical message was crystal clear to anyone who understood the code. The King of the Jews has been born in Israel. It wasn't superstition. It was celestial language God programmed into creation to mark the most important event in history. But how did the Magi know that this specific conjunction meant the Jewish Messiah and not just some other king? Because Daniel had connected astronomy with written prophecy. Numbers 24:17 declares, "A star will come out of Jacob, and a scepter will rise out of Israel." Balaam's prophecy, recorded 1500 years before Christ, established the code. When celestial signs coincided with prophetic timing, the promised king would arrive. Daniel 9:24-27 provided the chronometer: 70 weeks, 490 years, from the decree to rebuild Jerusalem until the Anointed One. The Magi knew how to do the math. They knew the time was near. Matthew 2:9 says, "The star went ahead of them until it came and stood over where the child was." How can a planet stop? Through retrograde motion, a phenomenon where, due to the relative orbits of Earth and other planets, a planet appears to stop in the sky and then reverse direction before resuming normal motion. Jupiter did exactly that in December of 7th BC, stopping over the Bethlehem region as seen from Jerusalem's perspective. God didn't violate the laws of physics. He programmed the solar system to function as a celestial GPS, pointing to the exact birthplace of the king. Psalm 19:1 declares, "The heavens declare the glory of God, the skies proclaim the work of his hands." It's not astrology, it's celestial theology. The same stars that guided Gentile Magi to the king the first time continue to testify to his glory today. The difference is that the Magi were watching, observing, waiting, and when the sign appeared, they responded. Meanwhile, in Jerusalem, scribes who possessed the complete scriptures saw nothing because they weren't looking. Daniel 3 records an event that became legend, passed down among Persian wise men for generations. Nebuchadnezzar ordered a golden statue 90 feet tall, simple decree. At the sound of music, everyone bows. Refusal meant death in the fiery furnace. 3 young Hebrews, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, stood firm. Their response cut off any negotiation. If our God wants to deliver us, he will deliver us. But if not, know this, O king, that we will not serve your gods. Daniel 3:17-18. They were thrown into the fire, and something impossible happened. Daniel 3:24-25 records that Nebuchadnezzar stood up astonished. Didn't we throw 3 men bound into the fire? Look, I see 4 men loose, and the appearance of the 4th is like a son of the gods. How did a pagan king who worshipped Marduk recognize the Son of God? Nebuchadnezzar was witnessing a theophany, a pre-incarnate manifestation of Christ. The Word who would become flesh in Bethlehem was already intervening physically in history, protecting those who honored him above all things. The 3 came out unharmed. Not even the smell of fire on their clothes. Why does this matter to the Magi 600 years later? Because this story became legend transmitted among Persian wise men. The God of the Hebrews wasn't distant like the Chaldean gods. He entered the fire with his servants. He manifested physically. And oral tradition preserved the most important detail. The 4th man had an appearance like a son of the gods. The Magi inherited the theology that the God of Israel had a son who manifested himself even before being born. When they saw the star and calculated the timing of Daniel's 70 weeks, they weren't looking for just a political king. They were looking for the one who walks in the fire without burning, the promised divine son who would finally take human form. Nebuchadnezzar's furnace established a principle that would echo to Bethlehem. God doesn't just predict the future through prophecies. He intervenes personally when necessary. The same Son of God who protected 3 Hebrews in 590 BC would be born as a baby in 7 BC to fulfill the final plan. The Magi understood the continuity. Daniel had witnessed the pre-incarnate manifestation of the Messiah. He recorded it. He taught it. And the successors of his school transmitted, when the time was fulfilled and the stars aligned, it wouldn't be a temporary appearance. It would be permanent incarnation. The Son of God who walked invisibly among empires would finally become visible, tangible, accessible. Daniel 5 records the last night of the Babylonian Empire. Belshazzar, Nebuchadnezzar's grandson, held a banquet with 1,000 nobles and, in a calculated act of blasphemy, ordered the sacred vessels from Jerusalem's temple brought to drink from during the orgy. It wasn't ignorance. It was deliberate defiance of the God of Israel, and the response came immediately. Daniel 5:5 describes fingers of a man's hand appearing and writing on the palace wall. It wasn't a vision. It was a physical hand without an attached body, writing before 1,000 witnesses. The message was 4 mysterious words: Mene, Mene, Tekel, Parsin. Belshazzar summoned all the wise men, offered extravagant reward, but no one could interpret. The Queen Mother recommended, call Daniel, Daniel 5:12. Daniel entered. He was over 80. He rejected rewards and interpreted with devastating prophetic authority. God has numbered your kingdom and finished it. You have been weighed on the scales and found wanting. Your kingdom has been divided and given to the Medes and Persians. Daniel 5:26-28. It wasn't a future threat. It was a decree already in execution. Daniel 5:30 records the fulfillment with chilling brevity. That very night Belshazzar, king of the Chaldeans, was slain. While Daniel was still in the palace, Persian armies led by Cyrus diverted the Euphrates River, entered under the gates, and conquered Babylon without prolonged battle. In one night, the most powerful empire on earth fell. The Persian MAGI, who served Cyrus, heirs of Daniel's tradition, witnessed firsthand. The God of Israel fulfills exact timetables. When he decrees, it happens. Empires rise and fall according to his word. And this lesson would be transmitted for 600 years. If God fulfilled everything Daniel prophesied about Babylon, Persia, and Greece, he would also fulfill it about the Messiah. When the celestial code appeared and the 70 weeks chronometer reached its end, the promised king would be born, not as a maybe, as absolute certainty. The Magi inherited that unshakable conviction. God operates on fixed schedules, and when the signs coincide with the prophecies, the response isn't doubt, it's action. Daniel 9:2 reveals what triggered the most important prophecy about the Messiah. In the first year of his reign, I, Daniel, understood from the books the number of years. For the desolations of Jerusalem was 70 years. Daniel was reading Jeremiah 25:11-12. Jerusalem had been destroyed in 586 BC. 70 years later would be 516 BC, but the temple still wasn't fully rebuilt. Daniel, then over 80, entered intense prayer with fasting, sackcloth, and ashes. The answer came before he even finished. The angel Gabriel appeared in swift flight, Daniel 9:21, with revelation that would span millennia. Daniel 9:24 delivers the full timeline. 70 weeks are determined upon your people and your holy city to finish transgression, to put an end to sin, to atone for iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy. These aren't literal 70 weeks. The Hebrew word shabuim means sevens. Periods of 7 years, 70 prophetic weeks, 490 years. And the purpose was clear: to permanently end sin and anoint the Messiah. Daniel 9:25 specifies, from the going forth of the command to restore and build Jerusalem until the Messiah the Prince, there shall be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. The key was the starting point. Ezra 7:11-26 records Artaxerxes' decree in 457 BC, authorizing Ezra to rebuild Jerusalem and restore worship. That was ground zero. The math was simple but precise. 7 weeks plus 62 weeks to 69 prophetic weeks, 483 years. Using the prophetic 360-day year calendar, 483 years, x 360 days, 173,180 days, added to 457 BC, it arrived exactly at AD 27, the year of Jesus' baptism, when he was anointed by the Holy Spirit and proclaimed the Lamb of God. John 1:29-34. Luke 19:41-44 records Jesus weeping over Jerusalem, saying, "If you had known the things that make for your peace, because you did not know the time of your visitation." Israel missed the timing because they didn't study Daniel with the same seriousness as the Persian Magi. Margin of error, 0. The Magi inherited this calculation. They knew that 483 years after Artaxerxes' decree, the Anointed One would be cut off. Daniel 9:26, Hebrew karat, meaning violent death used for sacrifices. When they saw the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in 7 BC, they did the math. The chronometer was nearing its end. The king would be born soon, grow up, be anointed at 30, and fulfill everything written. That's why they brought gold, gift for a king, frankincense, gift for a priest, and myrrh, used in burials, foreshadowing sacrificial death. They weren't spiritual tourists. They were prophetic witnesses, recognizing that God's clock never runs late. Daniel 10:2-3 records that at 84 years old, Daniel entered a partial fast for 21 days. In those days, I, Daniel, was mourning 3 full weeks. I ate no pleasant food, no meat or wine came into my mouth. It wasn't religious penance, it was intentional spiritual preparation. Daniel sought understanding about Israel's future, and God responded in a way that exposed invisible realities operating behind visible empires. Daniel 10:12-13 reveals something unsettling. From the first day that you set your heart to understand, your words were heard, and I have come because of your words. But the prince of the kingdom of Persia withstood me 21 days. The prayer was heard on day 1, but the answer was blocked for 3 weeks. Why? Because there is spiritual battle in the heavens that humans don't see. The prince of Persia was a demonic entity ruling the empire spiritually, and it was only defeated when Michael, the archangel assigned to Israel, intervened. Daniel 12:4-9 contains specific instruction. But you, Daniel, shut up the words and seal the book until the time of the end. The words are closed up and sealed till the time of the end. Daniel didn't fully understand. I heard, but I did not understand. Verse 8. But he recorded everything. Why? Because revelation isn't just for the one who receives it. It's for those who come later at the right time. The Magi inherited Daniel's sealed writings. They didn't understand everything, but they understood enough. God has a fixed schedule. Here's the final connection between Daniel's fast and the Magi. Both understood that revelation requires hunger. Daniel fasted 21 days to see the future. The Magi traveled months through deserts to see the king. Meanwhile, in Jerusalem, well-fed scribes, comfortable in their synagogues, studied scriptures daily, but lacked real hunger. They knew where the Messiah would be born, Micah 5:2. But when the Magi asked, "Where is he?" none of them walked 8 kilometers to check. Proximity to the word doesn't guarantee revelation. Hunger does. And the Magi, though Gentiles, had the hunger Israel had lost. They inherited from Daniel not just prophetic information, but passion for the one the prophecy announced. Matthew 2:1-3 captures the absurdity with brutal clarity. Now after Jesus was born in Bethlehem, behold, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem, saying, "Where is he who has been born King of the Jews?" When Herod the king heard this, he was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him. Gentile Magi traveled 1,500 kilometers through dangerous deserts, invested months of journey, followed astronomical calculations inherited from Daniel, and arrived asking with conviction, "Where is the king?" The reaction was panic, confusion, fear. All Jerusalem was troubled, not joy, ignorance. Herod summoned the scribes and chief priests. Matthew 2:4-6 records, "Where was the Messiah to be born? And they said to him, In Bethlehem of Judea, for thus it is written by the prophet." They quoted Micah 5:2 perfectly. They knew the prophetic geography. They had the correct information, but none of them moved. Herod sent the Magi to Bethlehem, but the very scribes who confirmed the location, religious leaders who studied prophecies every day, didn't walk the 8 kilometers to verify. Hungry Gentiles crossed continents. Comfortable Jews didn't cross a village. Why did Israel sleep while Gentiles watched? Wrong expectation? They awaited a warrior Messiah, not a suffering servant. Religious pride. Salvation belonged exclusively to Israel. Spiritual complacency. Proximity to scriptures without genuine hunger produces familiarity that kills wonder. They read prophecies as academic text, not living promise. The Magi read with hunger, Israel read with duty. Luke 2:8-20 adds another layer of irony. When Jesus was born, angels appeared not to scribes in Jerusalem, but to shepherds, a ritually impure, despised class. The shepherds didn't hesitate. They ran to Bethlehem, found, worshipped. In other words, God chose to reveal the Messiah's birth to pagan Gentiles from Persia and impure shepherds of Israel before revealing it to Jerusalem's religious elite. Because humility has open ears, pride has closed ears. Proverbs 8:17 declares, "I love those who love me, and those who seek me early will find me." It doesn't say those who are closest or those with the most knowledge. It says those who seek me. The Magi sought, Israel presumed. And the difference between seeking and presuming is the difference between worshipping the king in Bethlehem or debating theology in Jerusalem while the fulfillment happens without you. Daniel lived 90 years. He served under 4 different kings. He crossed the fall of one empire and the rise of another. And during 7 decades at the top of Babylon's and Persia's political structure, he never compromised integrity. Daniel 6:3-4 records that when enemies tried to accuse him, they could find no charge or fault because he was faithful. Excellence without corruption, holiness without isolation, influence without manipulation. Daniel's legacy can be summarized in 2 devastating principles. First, excellence honors God more than isolation. Daniel 1:20 declares that he and his friends were 10 times better than all the Magi. They weren't mediocre waiting for divine favor. They were the best students, best administrators, best counselors, and God multiplied. Second, integrity is non-negotiable, even under threat of death. Daniel 6 records that in his 80s, when a decree forbade prayer to any god, Daniel didn't hide his faith. He was thrown into the lion's den, and God shut the lions' mouths. But the deepest principle is this: prophetic influence changes future generations. Daniel never saw the Messiah personally. He died centuries before Bethlehem, but he planted seeds that germinated 600 years later when Persian Magi, heirs of what he taught, recognized the king before Israel did. No one lives just for themselves. Every act of faithfulness, every record of revelation, every seed of truth planted in unlikely soil can bear fruit in future generations. Daniel wrote, taught, transmitted. And centuries later, Gentiles found Jesus because an exiled Hebrew was faithful. The question isn't, will I see results in my lifetime? The question is, will I be faithful with what God gave me? Results belong to Him. Faithfulness belongs to us. The Persian Magi inherited not just knowledge about stars and numbers. They inherited spiritual hunger that Israel had lost. When they saw the conjunction in Pisces, they didn't think, interesting astronomical phenomenon. They thought, the promised king, the one Daniel said would change everything, has finally come. We need to see him. We need to worship him. It wasn't academic curiosity, it was spiritual pilgrimage. The journey of those who finally found what the human heart has sought since Eden, a king worthy of total devotion. The secret Daniel transmitted to the Persian Magi wasn't just academic knowledge about astrology or prophetic math, but the revelation that God fulfills exact timetables. When Daniel decoded Nebuchadnezzar's dream, interpreted the writing on Belshazzar's wall, and received the vision of the 70 weeks, he was mapping the divine agenda with surgical precision. The Persian Magi inherited this tradition of vigilance. For 600 years, generations of wise men transmitted Daniel's writings, watched the stars, and awaited the exact moment. When the triple conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn lit up the sky in 7 BC, they didn't hesitate. They packed gold, frankincense, and myrrh and set out on a months-long journey through the desert. Meanwhile, just 8 kilometers from Bethlehem, scribes and Pharisees debated minutiae of the law, completely oblivious to the prophetic fulfillment happening right under their noses. They had the scriptures. They knew Micah 5:2 pointed to Bethlehem. But they weren't watching. They weren't waiting with hunger. The lesson remains. Proximity to the word doesn't guarantee revelation. Those who were far away but hungry recognized the king. Those who were close but complacent missed the encounter. Daniel saw not only the first advent of the Messiah, but also the second. The vision of Armageddon he received remains partially sealed until the time of the end. But the signs continue. The prophecies that seem distant are being fulfilled, and the question doesn't change. Are you watching or presuming? Those who watch will not be surprised. The map is open, the stars testify, and the King is coming back.